30 years after losing his sister, Heather, James Donahue stumbles upon a recent video showing a girl who looks just like her.
Blair Witch.
So I'm a big fan of the Blair Witch Project. I saw it in the theater back in 1999. I was, it scared the hell out of me. To this day, I remember, kind of how I felt that night. It scared a lot of us, man. I was 17 years old at the time, and it may have actually been my very first theater horror experience. I'm pretty sure it was. It's the earliest one I can remember, anyways. So anyone who was paying attention back then will remember, the brilliant marketing and mystery surrounding this movie that we were all just anticipating. I mean, we got to remember, 1999, I mean, internet was still in its infancy. So, there was a very primitive website for Blair Witch Project, but super effective. I mean, I'm not going to go on about that because it's almost like a topic of its own, but it was very cool. And I mean, really, I don't think that level of marketing has ever really been matched for a movie ever since. And to this day, and forever, I will defend that movie because it's a very polarizing film that people either love or hate. And I get that, I'm okay if you just don't like it, but we all have personal tastes, but it's when people so boldly just dismiss it as trash, that's kind of when I have a problem. And it was a movie that was really just kind of perfect as it was. It really didn't need a sequel, much less two sequels. It was such a perfect film in its own right, and adding to it would only really diminish its impact. The first sequel doesn't really count much, so, Blair Witch, which is what I'm talking about today, is the true sequel. And I avoided it back when it came out until recently when I started seeing people talk about it in a fairly positive light. Being the fan that I am of the original, I felt open to seeing more, but I was also going to scrutinize, every detail that didn't work, in my opinion at least. So let's see how this Blair Witch Project fan felt about this unexpected sequel. Blair Witch was directed by Adam Wingard, a director that has really been making a name for himself in the horror world over the last decade or so. He directed modern cult classics like You're Next, The Guest, which was my introduction to Dan Stevens, which was cool. He also directed shorts for the first two VHS films, The ABCs of Death, and he also directed the Godzilla Kong films. He's a good director, and I'm happy to have him here in this horror world that we all live in. For the cast, we have 6 characters, with James Allen McCune playing James, oddly enough, the brother of Heather from the first film. He's kind of the main character here, but all the characters really have very similar screen time. I don't think I was familiar with any of these actors. And Simon Barrett was the writer here, and he's a frequent collaborator and friend of Adam Wingard. They work together a lot. So I thought it was cool, that after 8 years, I was not only willing to watch this finally, but I was actually kind of excited. And just like the 1999 film, this goes back to the found footage style, which makes sense. It works, but part of me wonders what it would have been like if it wasn't filmed in that style. Maybe it would have had a very, very different feel, but it being found footage makes it also feel kind of predictable. And I'll just say right now, it felt predictable enough as it was. To expand upon the Blair Witch lore, I think you need to be respectful of the past while doing something, maybe something new that is of a quality that lines up with the source material. And I don't really think that this does either one. Honestly, it's not what I expected in a way, because it's almost just a remake of the first film. It's weird. And that just kind of felt lazy to me. I'm not really blaming Wingard and Barrett because, they were hired to do a job, and I don't know how much freedom they were given. That said, it's baffling to me why anyone would make a sequel that is just a far less interesting version of a previous film. Anyways, I'll get to the plot here finally. Sorry about that. So as I said, James is the brother of Heather, from the Blair Witch Project. After pretty much giving up hope at this point of seeing his sister again, James stumbles upon an ominous video online, I believe it's on YouTube, oddly enough, where a woman that looks just like Heather appears in the video. I'm not really thrilled with the story from the beginning. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. James gets in touch with the guy who uploaded this video and they meet up. This is while James and 3 of his friends are heading out into the woods where Heather got lost, hoping to look for her once again and maybe even find her this time. Up to this point, I didn't really mind the movie. You know, the characters aren't too bad, and it was decently entertaining. I guess it kept my interest, kind of the build-up of like, what are they gonna do? You know, but oddly, it's once they get to the woods that things become far less interesting to me. And I think that it's because it's so similar to the first movie, only, well, way less interesting since it was already done so much better. Why they went that route, I just don't know, you know, and where the original film succeeds at like slowly building an atmosphere of dread, this one does really nothing of the sort. Instead, as soon as things start going badly, you know, the characters lose their cool instantly pretty much, and you just didn't have like time to build up the intensity. The writers tried to throw a few new things in, like some violence and even an actual monster that you see. I appreciated those things, but for me it was just too little and too late. So, as I've said many times after I watch a sequel or a remake or a reboot or a prequel, I have to ask myself, did this need to exist? Which in this case, I would say no. Other than the final 10 or 15 minutes, nothing is done that is really all that impactful. It doesn't really elaborate on the lore too much in any useful way, and it's kind of dull, not to mention the lazy plot. I think that at this point, the only way to make another good, movie in this franchise is to use the lore and do something entirely different, entirely new. A movie about Rustin Parr or The Witch, and, I'm not saying that I want those necessarily, but it might work better than rehashing already used ideas. I'm giving Blair Witch a 5 out of 10. It had some decent scares, but again, too little and too late. It just didn't bring enough original ideas to the table, and it felt overall kind of pointless. Cheers, guys.